Welcome to my channel. Today, we're looking at surviving winter in the Middle Ages. As the sun dipped lower in the sky and daylight hours became shorter, the people of the Middle Ages knew winter was coming. As the temperature dropped and snow began to fall, life in medieval Europe took on a very different pace. People had to drastically change their daily routines to survive the harsh conditions, with many dying from cold, famine, or disease every year. So how did people go about their daily lives during the winter months? And how did those who didn't succumb to the elements stay warm, fed and entertained? Medieval winters were not fun. The common folk had to endure sub-zero temperatures without the luxury of central heating, double glazing, or even proper insulation. Homes consisted of one or two rooms, made out of stone or wood, and these were rarely properly sealed against drafts or the elements. A fire would be the main source of heat for a family, and this would be built in a hearth set into the floor or a large stone fireplace. This would be used to cook food and provide some warmth for the inhabitants, but it wasn't much use if there was a draft or a broken window pane. Fires were also dangerous and could cause chimney fires or burn down a house, which was why families were often careful to extinguish them before going to bed. For a little extra heat, people would sleep in their beds wrapped in layers of wool and linen, sometimes sharing a bed with other family members or livestock to keep warm. Though having animals in the house would have been a smelly and sometimes dangerous proposition. If the weather was bad enough, animals would sometimes huddle together with humans for warmth, such as when a 19th century Russian peasant wrote of sheltering with his wife and children and 3 cows. For warmth, there wasn't always enough wood to keep fires burning throughout the winter, so people had to get creative with their sources of fuel. In some cases, people burnt dried animal dung or peat, which is a type of compressed moss found in bogs. Peat is still used as a fuel source in some parts of Europe today. Straw and hay were also used in parts of Europe, though this could cause thatch fires, which could spread quickly through villages. To prevent this, some villages employed men known as night watchmen who would patrol the town after dark to look out for fires. While staying warm was a priority, it was only one of the concerns for medieval villages. Food was also a major issue. It was harder to find fresh ingredients during the winter as farmers struggled to work in the cold weather and deliveries from other towns and cities were less frequent. During the summer months, medieval peasants would preserve food by drying, pickling, smoking or salting it to last them through the winter. However, this didn't mean that they wouldn't run out of supplies. Bread was a staple of the medieval diet and flour could be stored for longer than fresh grain. However, flour prices would rise dramatically during the winter months due to demand, and sometimes people would resort to making bread out of sawdust, plaster, bones, or the bodies of small animals because of a lack of other ingredients. This obviously wasn't ideal, and sawdust in particular was a very low nutrition food filler that required a great deal of chewing power to grind up. Sometimes meals might include a thin broth made from meat or vegetables, mixed with whatever grains they had available, such as wheat, rye or barley. Barley was considered a poor man's grain, as it wasn't as good for making bread as wheat. But it could be made into a type of gruel called messel, which was eaten by beggars and the poor. Messel was made simply by boiling barley in water and adding salt or other seasonings. It was bland and watery, but filling nonetheless. Vegetables were also harder to come by during the winter. The root vegetables such as carrots, parsnips, onions, and potatoes were easier to harvest than leafy greens. Cabbage was also popular as it could be stored over the winter. During the warmer months, wild game such as rabbits, squirrels, and deer would be hunted. But these animals were harder to catch once snow had covered the ground. Fish was another important source of protein, but fishing was difficult during the winter as fish were harder to find. When rivers froze over, people would sometimes cut holes in the ice and drop a line in to try and catch something. Some fish, such as cod, could be bought dried and salted, and these were popular in coastal areas. Unfortunately, even if you managed to stay warm and fed through the winter, you still ran the risk of succumbing to an illness that could kill you or leave you with lifelong health problems. The most famous pandemic to strike during the Middle Ages was the Black Death, which arrived in Europe in 1346 and killed around 25 million people. There were other outbreaks of bubonic plague throughout the next few centuries, and these were just as deadly. While outbreaks could happen any time of the year, the cold weather often led to a spike in cases as people huddled together for warmth. And rats carrying the disease could seek shelter in homes during the winter months. The symptoms of the Black Death were horrible and included painful swellings in the groin or armpit, fever, chills, weakness, and vomiting. Those who survived the initial infection could suffer long-term effects such as arthritis, which is why it's believed that Shakespeare's father died after contracting the disease. The Little Ice Age saw outbreaks of other illnesses become more common, including tuberculosis, smallpox, measles, and influenza. These diseases often killed children and the elderly first, but no one was safe. Smallpox and measles were particularly dangerous as they were highly contagious and had no cure. The best way to avoid catching a disease was to stay indoors as much as possible. Entertainment during a medieval winter was mostly limited to indoor activities. People would play games such as chess and cards. Wealthy landowners could afford to hire musicians or jugglers to perform for their amusement. Religious plays and mummers' plays, which were performances featuring local stories and jokes, were popular, as were miracle plays, which were based on biblical stories. During the Christmas season, people would celebrate with church services and plays, as well as carols and wassailing, which involved singing traditional songs while visiting houses and offering blessings in exchange. For food and drink, festivals celebrating saints such as Saint Lucy in December were also popular. In some places, bonfires were lit and people would jump over them for good luck in the new year. Winter was also a time for feasting, and special foods such as boar's head, peacock, tarts, and spiced wine were served at special meals. For those lucky enough to make it to spring, the end of winter was greeted with celebrations. Springtime was associated with new life, fertility, and rebirth, and people welcomed the return of warmer weather and longer days. Easter was one of the most important festivals in the Christian calendar, and the story of Jesus Christ's resurrection was celebrated with church services, plays, and bonfires. After the long, dark days of winter, people would greet the arrival of spring with joy. It wasn't only the weather that made winter a difficult time of year. Social and political unrest could easily cause the already difficult conditions to become even worse. During the 100 Years' War, for example, villages were sometimes abandoned during the winter months as residents fled to safer areas. Famine was also a problem, and food shortages made the winter harsher for everyone. During the siege of Paris in 1429, people were forced to eat the bodies of small animals and dogs because of a lack of food. Anyone who couldn't find enough to eat was vulnerable to starvation, and people would sometimes beg or steal to survive. Thieves were often punished severely for stealing food, although this didn't stop people from trying to survive. Surviving winter in the Middle Ages was tough. Harsh weather, food shortages, and outbreaks of deadly diseases meant that people had to be prepared for anything. Those who made it through the winter months knew that they had been lucky. The people of the Middle Ages adapted to their environment and developed ways of coping with the challenges they faced. By understanding their way of life, we can gain a greater appreciation for the difficulties they endured and the resilience they showed in the face of adversity. Now it's time to hear from you. What was your favorite part of this video? What would you have done differently to survive winter in the Middle Ages? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one.